I feel I'm living in one of those governments where they say silence and silenced me briefly, but just did not get me out of the way today. So that's a good thing. Almost 7 minutes after 8 o'clock. I want to thank you for spending some time with us today. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. As Mr. Big Voice just told you, some of the things we've got going on. We haven't seen him in a while. We didn't really try to tell people that he was out of town because, well, you don't tell people in this day and age on the radio you're going on vacation or you're going away because bad things can happen while you're away. Steve Millington is back home though after a long visit. Get this, to Australia and New Zealand. I guess he's looking at property so he can expand his empire in other parts of the world. I've got to ask him if it's really true that when you flush a toilet down under, that it actually circles the other way. He'll be able to answer that question, I'm sure. He may actually talk about more important things, though, while he's in studio with us. He's going to be along about 8:30 today. Also, we have a fellow that, I'll tell you what, one of the best people I've ever known. He is a longtime television meteorologist. He started his meteorology career, in fact, weather career, here in Idaho, television career, way back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and then so good at what he did that his career took him all the way to places like Washington, D.C., and he worked for many, many years on the Delmarva Peninsula on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake, where I got to know him and was just one of the finest human beings I know as well. He dropped me a line the other day, and he saw a post I put on Facebook about the VA hospitals around the country and the difficulties the VA happens to be having. And he shared with me a story of his own, and I'll tell you what, it was just gut wrenching to realize that these things are happening to people who actually put on a uniform for this country and defended it. And his story of what happened when he went into a VA hospital and what happened to him when he came out. Uh, well, it's a tragic story, but on the other hand, it's a story he'd like to share because he hopes that this will encourage people really to badger your legislators, your U.S. senators, and your members of the House of Representatives about. We keep hearing that the care will improve. I visited Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington just a few months before it closed. A group of people that I know had put together an event, and we went there and we did a barbecue. Well, I got to go along just really as an observer. I didn't have to do much of the heavy lifting, but I walked around this courtyard and I talked to many of the people who were there recovering, and they were the beneficiaries of the barbecue. And a few months later, that facility closed because, frankly, the care there had become so substandard, and they moved everyone out to Fort Belvoir and over to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and so the mission was sent to some other places in hopes that it would improve. But it's on the back burner again. When it's not on the front radar for most Americans, it doesn't. I'm mixing metaphors, I know, but it doesn't get a lot of attention. So he's going to talk with us about that in the next hour of the show, and I hope that you can stick around for that because I think it's one of the most important things you're going to hear for a very, very long time. Speaking of important, one of Idaho's best-known citizens made an appearance last night on Fox television. Greta Van Susteren has been hosting a show at Fox now for many, many years, which I believe you can catch at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, our local time. It's 7 o'clock on the East Coast, but 5 o'clock here. And she traveled to North Carolina, and she got a chance to visit with Pastor Saeed Abedini, who, as you know, was among those hostages released by the Iranians last week. He is now recovering in North Carolina at the center that is run by his friend Franklin Graham. He had an opportunity to fill Greta Van Susteren in about the difficulties that he endured while he was rotting away in a dungeon in Iran for several years. And even when he tried to plead for his release and tried to say, hey, I'm not a threat to anyone here, he explained to her exactly what he went through when he appeared before a judge in court. You've got to take a listen to this because I think it tells us so much about what we're dealing with the Islamic world and frankly, why we really don't want too much of it here.
He just said, you know why you are here? I said, yeah, I'm here because of my Christian faith and starting the house churches all over Iran. And he said, no, you are not here for this. You are here because you want to use Christianity to remove government. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just came here to start orphanage, loving people, and share the gospel with people, and just that. And I said, no, you guys are using Christianity to remove the government. That's the reason that you are here. And I said, no, I didn't do that. I pray for you, I love you, and I didn't come for that. And she started like yelling at me, very angry. And when my lawyer started talking, he didn't let him to talk. And so after 10 minutes, they said to the guards that you can take them back to prison.
In other words, being a Christian in that part of the world, it doesn't matter what work you're doing. He pointed out he was there primarily to work on an orphanage, and nothing more than that. But because the other thing is, they like to harass people who have roots in Iran. If they have become Christians or they are visiting from the United States, it's obvious that this is all part of a larger MO that takes place in that part of the world. He looked pretty good on TV. Some of you may have actually seen it. His hair is a little thinner, obviously, because he's a little older now, and he's lost a bit of that on the front of his scalp. But apart from that, he looks like he's going to be in his recovery will go well. He's obviously lost some weight through this entire ordeal, but he will likely be back. I would imagine within a couple of weeks in the Boise area, and likely back to preaching not long after that happens. It's 8:13. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have been warned so often about what these people are like. It's not just Pastor Abedini, but we've had others who've come through our own community and told us we are dealing with something. It is to sit here and say, well, it's a religion of peace. No. Number one, peace doesn't get involved with it whatsoever. Number two, calling it a religion, there is a religious aspect of it, but it's a way of life. It's a form of government. The actual word Islam means submission, and it simply means when you surrender to Christ, you essentially have liberty. When you surrender to Islam, you have none, and that's the big difference in all of this. And I'm thinking about the changes we're seeing in our own community. You don't have to drive very far. You drive down. I went down Washington yesterday. I had to go do a little shopping. And it's beginning to look a lot like the third world in that part of the city of Twin Falls. Now, I'm not saying any of those people are dangerous. I am telling you, though, that the numbers will grow, and if we allow them to grow, it is going to cause some cultural upheaval. Now, if you're a leftist, you'll say, well, that's good. They always like to pass along that line that what do you call it, a bromide that the fact that our diversity makes us stronger. Yes, our diversity makes us stronger, and yet they never provide any evidence to actually back up a statement like that. The other issue here is we've got people of the Christian faith who also don't seem to get what's going on. I've got a couple of clippings this morning. This one is from Crisis Magazine. That is a conservative Roman Catholic publication. Solidarity with Islam, and then it has a question mark. William Kilpatrick, the writer. After the San Bernardino massacre, the Angelus, the Los Angeles Archdiocesan newspaper, carried an article calling for, quote, greater solidarity with Islam, unquote. You get that. You had a couple of Islamic radicals go into a workplace where people had thrown them a baby shower just a few months before, and they went in and they killed, 15 of their coworkers or so, left a couple of other dozen people harmed and maimed, likely for the rest of their lives, obviously, and emotionally scarred. And he is saying that we have to have solidarity with these people. He starts off by observing, the writer says, that, quote, this is not a good time to be a Muslim in the Western world, unquote. Well, Mr. Kilpatrick, the writer, says maybe Muslims in the West are probably getting a lot of suspicious stares these days. On the other hand, you could just as easily say that it's not a good time to be a non-Muslim in the Western world. Judging by the body count, he writes, Western citizens have far more cause for concern. And we're not alone. This is from the Christian Post. Christian Post has a lot of evangelical influence in it. I got this in my email late yesterday afternoon. Franklin Graham says Wheaton College, where his parents met, must fire the hijab-wearing professor. The Reverend Franklin Graham says he's deeply concerned about reports that the faculty council at Wheaton College has made a recommendation against the move to terminate a tenured professor who suggested that Christians and Muslims, worship the same God. In other words, they got cowed by the local Chicago media is what happened. This is no minor issue that should be debated. Islam denies that God has a son. They deny that Jesus is God, he added. They do not believe in a triune God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I can tell you, he said, Islam and Christianity clearly do not worship the same God. How the faculty council can now support the professor being allowed to teach students is deeply concerning. So if you have Christian leaders in the West who continue to raise the white flag, It's not going to get any better. We have a caller with us. You're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. All right. Thank you for the patience. 736 0300, 736 0300. And of course, you can reach me by email at bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. We have another caller with us, or perhaps the same caller. It's really irrelevant. It's our first caller of the day, and you're on the air on Top Story.
Yeah, I didn't call earlier. Quickly, and I'll be done. I get the feeling that the Muslim existence is a miserable one. And when you are forced to do something that you may or may not even believe because of peer pressure, if you're a Christian and you're going to church because of everybody else that expects you to be there, other than the fact that you should just have a relationship with God, Christ, and you're doing it for that reason, that would be a miserable existence. And hey, there's no question that they're angry, and they're probably going to be that way till Christ comes back. And I'll hang up.
I thank you for the call, and I think they're going to they're in for a mightily big surprise when that day arrives. And you're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. They just had an interfaith gathering this last week in Boise, and here at CSI they had a guy come from Whitworth College and talked about the worldview of Islam and basically trying to marry oil and water in the sense of Christianity and Islam. Islam is a theocracy. It's mostly political. It has a little bit of religion, but it's mostly a theocracy. It's a political agenda, and they've declared war on the world. Let's wake up, folks.
Yeah.
And it's just, they look what's happening in Europe. They're overrunning Europe, and they're going to overrun us if we allow these people. Now we have the Zika, Z-I-K-A virus that's coming in, probably with these children and so forth, coming from Central and South America, and that's going to be another problem. So we're bringing in all these diseases that we never even heard of in recent times.
And I thank you for the call. It makes all of our liberal friends out there, liberal friends might be a stretch, but it makes all of them feel better. If our own children die, I guess they feel that's a sacrifice we have to make. In other words, that way we won't hurt somebody else's feelings. So, sacrificing your own children, it's almost Old Testament, isn't it? Maybe there'll be some judgment for the liberals, too. 26 is our temperature, and you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 20 after. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning. Steve Millington will be joining us in a few minutes as well. Want to remind people tomorrow morning, joining us in studio, Dr. Jonathan Tripp, or one of his associates. We'll be talking better health with Tripp Family Medicine. We do that every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning, and the doctor, of course, usually comes along with some things that are actually timely, that is, related to medical issues that are currently affecting you and your family. And we offer you an opportunity also to chime in. And while the doctor or one of his associates is in the studio, though, or they are in the studio, I guess, if they're all here, we should point out you can really ask them about any medical question you have. That's what they're here for. Tripp Family Medicine is located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. One of our callers, maybe both of them, I think, referenced what's going on in Europe and how we put on these blinders when it comes to opening the doors to Islam, and Europe should be very much a warning signal. There's a guy who writes at the Wall Street Journal by the name of William McGurn. Now, I'm not terribly fond of all of their writers, but he's one of the best. I believe he's out of Dallas, Texas, but he says, nearly a quarter century ago, Yale's Harold Bloom famously described America as a dangerously religion-soaked, even religion-mad society. And he says, when Europeans gaze upon our shores, this is pretty much what they see. They see an America hostage to primitive beliefs. At a moment when Europe is reporting that Islamic State is planning more peristyle attacks, that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because America's overt religiosity blinds Europe's elites to the one part of the American experiment most relevant to their needs today, our secularism, as opposed to theirs. Theirs is an entirely different one. They have. So I remember sitting in a church a few years ago and hearing the story that in Ireland, which used to be one of the most Catholic countries in the world, if not the most Catholic country, that one of the seminaries, the only remaining seminary in Ireland, was graduating 8 priests that year, which was the lowest in well over a century, back to the time when the religion was generally prohibited. And it strikes you that they don't care any longer. They don't see it as important, and because of that, they have people who are moving in who have a different faith or a different ideology, the better way to put that, and they're going to get swamped by this. The writer says the reality is that many in European cities today, a Jew cannot walk the streets in safety. And then they mention a Jewish man almost being decapitated in Marseille a few weeks ago. And what did the French say in response? Don't wear your yarmulkes in public. In other words, appease the invaders. Women are also losing the freedom to walk Europe's streets in safety, as we know from New Year's Eve. The reality is not much better for sexual minorities. Only a month ago in Sweden, a teenage refugee from North Africa was charged with beating a gay man to death and then wrapping a dead snake around the victim's body. That's not the only thing. I happen to come across this one as well. These just keep coming off the presses. This is from the Daily Caller. A 15-year-old refugee was charged with murder Monday after allegedly stabbing a 22-year-old female worker at a refugee center in Sweden. It took place at a small refugee home outside the city of Gothenburg, where 10 unaccompanied teenagers between 14 and 17 years of age live. The motive is unknown. Police say there was blood everywhere. Swedish police responded to 322 reports of violence at refugee homes in 2015, more than twice as many as in 2014. A knife fight between asylum seekers in the city of Homestead ended in multiple reported stabbings just last week. The unprecedented violence is putting a huge strain on resources at the moment, according to the National Chief of Police. Gosh, and you know what? We should bring more of them in. A strain. Well, yeah, all right. Of course, he gets more police officers that way, and perhaps they can get what they ultimately want, and that is a police state, lock everybody down. Call it North Korea, if you will. Then you won't have to worry about any violence among the people, just violence against them from the government. 828, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And just a quick corollary to all of this, Trey Gowdy made an appearance yesterday on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Speaking of the worldwide war with Islam, Gowdy says there's going to be some very eye-opening and surprising details coming out about his Benghazi hearings shortly. And he's asking, why did the first wheel not take off for hours and hours and hours, meaning the people who were ready to go in and perform the rescue. And as I've told you on this program, I know some of the details about that from a radio consultant who happened to be working with Armed Forces Radio in Sicily at the time, and said they were ready. They could have had the helicopter gunships there in 4 hours. They would have had a nice, safe landing, because prior to that, it would take only a matter of minutes for our jets to fly over across the Mediterranean. You cut the distance down by half in Sicily, and they, with their precision bombs, would have taken out the bad guys. And then the gunships, the choppers, could have come in afterwards and picked up the Americans who ended up getting killed instead that day 4 years ago. I've got to tell you, we better wake up. You're sitting here saying, well, you know, somebody said to me one time, it's not like they're drilling out in the sagebrush. Not yet. This notion that we can just sit back, put up our feet, and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait. The danger grows every day. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a special guest coming up. The prodigal Republican County Chairman has returned after wandering the world. We will ask him if it's true, that story about the way you flush a toilet in that part of the Down Under. 8:30, Bill Colley with you. Steve Millington joining us in just a few minutes. It's 27 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.